I still remember the exact second my stomach dropped. The glass doors of the Empire Tower meeting room slid open, and there she was, Madison Cole, sitting in my chair at the head of the table. Not just sitting. She leaned back with that smug smile people wear when they know the spotlight belongs to them. And in front of the entire leadership team, she looked at me and said, "Didn't you hear? We've moved on." The room froze. Some people tried not to stare, but their eyes flickered toward me anyway. My seat, my role, had been stolen in broad daylight, and no one said a word. Not a cough, not a whisper, just silence. My heart was racing, but my face, I kept it calm. Inside, though, I felt like I was watching my own career's funeral play out in real time. It wasn't just about a chair. It was about everything I had built for 17 years. The systems, the safeguards, the sleepless nights erased with a single smirk and a rehearsed line. And the worst part? They wanted me to stand there humiliated while she enjoyed the applause. In that moment, I wasn't a leader, I wasn't a partner, I was invisible, disposable. And yet, even as my throat tightened and my hands curled into fists under the table, a part of me whispered, "Not yet. Don't break. Watch. Remember," before I share what came next. Where are you listening from right now? Have you ever been pushed aside like you didn't matter? Drop a comment below if this story stirs something in you. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. For nearly 17 years, I wasn't just another employee at Empire Tower. I was the backbone nobody noticed, the quiet hand that steadied the company whenever the ground shook. When systems glitched, when regulators knocked, when markets crashed in the middle of the night, it was my phone that rang, and I answered every time. I spoke 4 languages, negotiated with clients across 3 continents, and patched holes in our risk models that could have sunk the firm. But you wouldn't have seen my name on the headlines. I wasn't the one posting victory speeches on LinkedIn or posing for glossy magazine spreads. I was the shadow behind the curtain, the one who kept the lights on while others took the stage. That was fine for a while. I told myself I didn't need applause, that stability was reward enough. But the truth is, silence can get heavy. Watching someone else walk away with the credit for battles you fought alone leaves a mark you can't quite shake. Still, I endured. I moved from one crisis to the next, smoothing over disasters before they could explode. The board never asked how. They just nodded, signed papers, and went back to chasing the next shiny trend. And then came Madison, the CEO's niece, a TikTok personality turned visionary strategist. She waltzed in with her camera-ready smile and a brand new title no one else had been considered for. Overnight, she became the face of a company I had held together with both hands. Suddenly, it didn't matter how many systems I had built or how many clients trusted my word. I was told I looked outdated. A filing cabinet in a world obsessed with neon screens and viral clips. They moved me from my corner office to a windowless cubicle, squeezed between the server closet and a half-dead cactus someone jokingly named Greg. I laughed it off in front of people, but when I sat down alone at that tiny desk, the air felt different, thicker, as if the walls themselves were whispering, "You're being replaced." And the worst part, deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of the slide. Something bigger and far more humiliating was already on its way. It happened on a Thursday morning, one of those meetings where investors dial in, analysts watch every slide, and reputations can be made or destroyed in minutes. I walked into the boardroom carrying the same quiet confidence I'd built over nearly 2 decades. But as the lights dimmed and the projector flickered on, I felt something was off. Madison stood at the front with a sleek clicker in her hand. She wasn't nervous. In fact, she looked thrilled, like she was about to unveil the cure for cancer. But then the first slide appeared, and my breath caught in my chest. It was my model, the risk framework I had spent years refining, the one that had saved us during 2 separate market crashes. My equations, my flowcharts, all dressed up with trendy colors and buzzwords, but still mine. And yet, not a word of credit, not a mention of my name. Madison simply smiled and said, "Our proprietary system blends intuition with cutting-edge AI, a bold new vision for the future." Around the table, heads nodded. Some even whispered words of praise. A few glanced at me but quickly looked away. I sat still, hands folded, my expression neutral. Inside, though, it felt like a slow fire was burning a hole through my chest. The deeper she went, the worse it became. Every safeguard I had written, every calculation I had tested through sleepless nights, she presented them as if she had dreamed them up between dance videos. She even cracked a joke about old-school methods and flashed a slide comparing a filing cabinet to a glowing neon brain. The room laughed, and I was the filing cabinet. In that moment, I realized something important. They weren't just stealing my work. They were erasing me, rewriting the story of the company without my name in it. And the applause she received at the end was the final nail. I stayed quiet, I clapped along with the rest of them, but inside I made a decision. If they wanted me invisible, I would let them think I was, until the moment they least expected it. The slideshow was only the beginning. The real blow came in the days that followed. One morning, I logged in to review a report, and a red message flashed across my screen. Access denied. I tried another folder. Same result. One by one, the keys I had held for years were taken out of my hands. By noon, my name had vanished from the internal project documents. Reports I had authored were suddenly stamped with someone else's signature. It was like watching my identity being peeled away line by line until nothing was left. I wasn't just ignored anymore. I was being erased. Colleagues avoided my eyes in the hall. Some muttered a half-hearted, "Sorry, Vic," but most kept their heads down. They knew better than to challenge the new order. Madison strutted through the office with her phone in hand, recording short clips of her day as a young female executive. The caption on one video said, "Taking the throne, #boss vibes." And yes, she was sitting in the very chair where I had once fought through 12-hour negotiations. The CEO only added salt to the wound. In a meeting, when someone suggested I might still play a role, he cut them off. She's not a queen. She's infrastructure. I'll never forget those words. Infrastructure. As if I were drywall or plumbing. Necessary, but invisible. Replaceable. That night, I sat alone in my cubicle beside the humming server closet and Greg, the half-dead cactus. My badge still worked, but it felt like the walls themselves had decided I didn't belong anymore. I stared at the empty screen, my reflection faint against the black glass, and I asked myself, was this really how 17 years ended? The silence gave me no answer, but somewhere deep inside, beneath the hurt, a different thought began to form, a whisper I couldn't ignore, and that whisper would soon change everything. A few nights later, long after most of the building had gone dark, I found myself digging through the dusty cabinets in the records room. It wasn't nostalgia. It was survival. I needed to understand how they had stripped me out of everything so quickly, how a lifetime of work could vanish with a few keystrokes. The folders were heavy, stuffed with old contracts, compliance filings, and legal forms most people never bother to read. But I wasn't most people. I knew that the real story of any company lived in the fine print. And somewhere between the faded memos and outdated tax filings, I stumbled across it. An appointment letter. My name typed in bold, clean font, managing partner. The document was dated years back during a messy merger that no one ever liked to talk about. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. A formality, a safeguard. But reading it now, I noticed something the others had forgotten. The letter had never been revoked. No amendment, no termination clause. Legally, I was still listed as holding that authority. Curious, I pulled up the SEC's online database, my fingers shaking just slightly as I typed. And there it was, clear as day, Form ADV. My name still attached, still active, still binding. Madison's selfies and hashtags didn't matter here. The government didn't recognize her. They recognized me. For a moment, I just sat back, letting the weight of it sink in. After weeks of humiliation, weeks of being treated like a ghost, I had found something solid, something undeniable. I whispered to myself, almost afraid of the sound. They forgot to erase me where it matters most. And suddenly, the silence of that records room felt different. Not heavy, not suffocating, but charged, like the air before a storm. I closed the folder, carefully slid it into my bag, and walked out with my pulse pounding. Because now I knew, if I played this right, the same system that had buried me could be the very weapon that brought everything crashing down. The discovery of that forgotten clause burned in the back of my mind for days. I didn't rush. I didn't storm into anyone's office demanding justice. No, that's exactly what they would expect. Instead, I sat quietly at my cubicle, next to the humming server closet and poor Greg the cactus, and I began to type. Not an angry message, not a dramatic confrontation, just an email. Polite, precise. The kind of email that doesn't raise alarms at first glance, but plants a seed the moment the recipient reads it. The subject line was simple: AD Officer Confirmation. The recipient, Levinson, our corporate counsel, a man who lived and breathed procedure, the kind who cared less about office gossip and more about compliance fine print. I attached the documents, my appointment letter, the relevant SEC forms, and wrote just a few carefully chosen lines. Dear Levinson, I noticed a small detail in our filings that may need clarification. My status as managing partner appears to remain active on record. Please advise if any formal amendment has been submitted. No action required at this time, just ensuring accuracy. I reread those lines at least 10 times. Every word measured soft as silk, yet sharp enough to cut through concrete. Not a threat, not an accusation, just a reminder, written proof that the law still had my name on it. When I finally hit send, I didn't expect fireworks. I expected silence, and silence is exactly what I got. The next day, our normally busy legal Slack channel went quiet. No casual updates, no compliance reminders. By afternoon, even the internal newsletter was delayed due to review. It was subtle, almost invisible, but I knew the ripple had begun. And as I watched Madison strut down the hallway, filming yet another executive day in the life clip, I smiled to myself. She thought the throne was hers. She had no idea the floor beneath her was already beginning to crack. Because one email, silk on the surface, steel underneath, had just changed the game. They called it Phoenix Day, Madison's big idea. A rebrand that was supposed to show the world we were reborn and ready for the future. Posters went up in the lobby, the logo was slapped with a shiny gradient, and she filmed herself saying things like, "This isn't just business, this is transformation." But the centerpiece of her spectacle was worse. A line of company-branded NFTs, digital tokens, shaped like glowing birds and pixelated lions. She spoke about them as if they were going to change the entire investment landscape. I sat in the back of the auditorium, watching analysts exchange confused glances. Clients didn't want digital trinkets, they wanted stability. Yet there she was, promising that a cartoon eagle on the blockchain would somehow prove our firm's innovation. I watched one investor lean over to another and whisper, "Is this a joke?" Another typed furiously on his phone. My inbox buzzed minutes later with a short message from a longtime client. "Please confirm you're still with the firm because this is getting strange." The higher Madison's voice climbed with excitement, the lower the mood in the room dropped. By the time she unveiled the Phoenix Rising video, complete with dramatic music and neon flames, the silence from the investors was deafening. Not applause, not even polite nods, just silence. Then came the first angry phone call. A veteran client named Roman, who had been with us since the beginning, stormed into the lobby demanding answers. Another, Samir, fired off an email saying he'd pull his funds if the nonsense didn't stop. The house of cards was shaking, and Madison still smiled for the cameras, oblivious. As I left the auditorium, a young associate accidentally forwarded me the entire investor deck. It landed in my inbox with one line at the top, "Draft, not for distribution." I couldn't help but smile. Because buried in that deck was exactly the kind of mistake I had been waiting for. The investor deck was the final push I needed. For weeks, I had sat quietly piecing together every document, every thread of evidence. Now I had all of it in one place. The timing couldn't have been better. That night in my apartment overlooking the city, I opened my laptop and began drafting the message that would turn silence into shockwaves. No shouting, no accusations. Just a formal notice, calm, clinical, impossible to ignore. The subject line read, "Notice of Affiliation and Authority." The recipients, corporate counsel, compliance officers, and most importantly, the Securities and Exchange Commission. I attached the appointment letter, the Form ADV, and the supporting filings that proved my authority had never been revoked. Then I typed the words that mattered most. Effective immediately, I am dissolving my affiliation with Empire Capital as managing partner of record. Please note that all existing agreements, filings, and activities conducted without my authorization remain under review until further notice. I paused before hitting send. My finger hovered over the mouse, my heart steady but heavy. This wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. A single keystroke would flip the power dynamic of the entire firm. When the email left my outbox, I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. The city lights blinked in the distance, but I barely noticed. Because I knew at that exact moment, the walls inside Empire Tower were starting to close in. The next morning, the signs were everywhere. Calendar invites vanished, Slack channels went dead, compliance meetings popped up without warning, and in the boardroom behind the frosted glass, voices were raised. The CEO barked orders. Madison waved her hands, but none of it mattered now. Because a formal notice wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a lock, and I had just turned the key. The real question was, who would break first? When the freeze settled in, the investors, the CEO, or Madison herself? The collapse didn't come as an explosion. It came as a quiet freeze. One morning, the elevators opened on the 54th floor, and the energy inside Empire Tower felt wrong. The usual chatter in the hallways was gone. People walked fast, heads down, clutching folders like shields. Something had shifted overnight. By 9 a.m., the first investor pulled out. Roman III sent a letter demanding his funds back, citing governance concerns. By 10, Samir Vance joined him, threatening litigation if compliance didn't answer his questions. Phones rang off the hook, but no one dared pick them up. Screens flickered with urgent messages, yet no reply ever came. I watched from my cubicle as the panic spread upward. Madison stormed past her heels, hitting the marble floor like gunshots. She shoved open the boardroom door, shouting about unnecessary delays and haters trying to ruin her vision. The CEO slammed his hand on the table and barked, "Call her! Get Victoria on the phone, now!" My phone lit up seconds later. One call, then another, then 5 more in a row. I let them all ring out. The vibration hummed against the desk, steady and relentless, but I didn't move, not yet. Through the glass walls of the boardroom, I could see the chaos unfold. Papers scattered, faces pale executives pacing like trapped animals. The firm that once felt untouchable was crumbling in real time, and all I had done was send a single notice, nothing more. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I had carried them quietly, invisibly, making sure no cracks ever showed. Now their own arrogance had turned those cracks into fault lines, and they were falling straight through. The question wasn't if Empire Tower would implode, it was who they would sacrifice to save themselves once the dust began to settle. By the end of that disastrous week, the pressure inside Empire Tower was unbearable. Investors were circling like vultures, regulators were asking pointed questions, and every executive was desperate to protect themselves. And when fear takes over, the first instinct is always the same: find someone to blame. It didn't take long before Madison's name floated to the top of every whispered conversation. The CEO, who had once paraded her as the fresh face of the future, now avoided her in hallways. Board members who had clapped at her flashy presentations suddenly spoke of reckless initiatives and immature leadership. The very people who handed her the throne were sharpening their knives. I saw it unfold from the sidelines. Madison stormed past my cubicle one afternoon, her mascara streaked, muttering into her phone, "They're throwing me under the bus. They can't do this to me." But, of course, they could. That's how power works in places like this. When the walls start to crumble, loyalty is the first thing to die. The official memo came the next morning. A bland 2-paragraph statement. Effective immediately, Madison Cole will be stepping down from her role to pursue other opportunities. No mention of the chaos she caused, no accountability from those above her. Just a neat little sacrifice to calm the fire. For the board, it was damage control. For Madison, it was the end of her carefully staged illusion. And for me, it was confirmation. Confirmation that the empire was hollow, that its leaders would eat their own before admitting the truth. I should have felt pity, but as I watched her pack up the designer handbags she had stashed under her desk, I felt something else entirely. Clarity. She was only the first piece to fall, because the real reckoning hadn't even started yet. After Madison's fall, the building felt different. Not calmer, not safer, but quieter. The kind of quiet that comes when people are too afraid to speak, when every conversation is hushed behind closed doors. I didn't celebrate. There were no victory laps, no smug smiles. Instead, I kept my head down, working from that same cubicle by the server closet. On the surface, nothing about me had changed, but underneath, everything had shifted. Calls began trickling in, first from smaller clients who remembered how I had once steadied their portfolios in the middle of a storm. Then from larger investors, the ones who had publicly praised the CEO just weeks earlier, now asking for a discreet conversation. Their words were polite, but the message was clear. They trusted me, not the people still scrambling at the top. One afternoon, an email arrived with a subject line that stopped me cold. Consulting offer. Immediate engagement. It was from Roman himself, the very man who had once threatened to withdraw his millions. Now he wanted me to guide him through the chaos, and he was willing to pay more for a month of my advice than I'd earned in a year at the firm. I stared at the screen for a long moment, not out of disbelief, but out of recognition. This was the shift. This was the moment the invisible backbone they had discarded was suddenly visible again, not because I demanded it, but because the cracks in their empire forced them to see it. That evening, I sat by my apartment window looking down at the rush of yellow taxis streaming through the city. The skyline glittered like it always had, but for the first time in weeks, I felt steady. A quiet triumph. Not loud, not vengeful, just undeniable. Still, I knew the story wasn't finished. Because if there was one thing I had learned in 17 years, it was this: empires rarely collapse in silence. The loudest lesson was still waiting. In the end, the empire didn't collapse in a fiery explosion. It cracked quietly, piece by piece, until even those at the top could no longer pretend everything was fine. The CEO spent weeks trying to reassure investors, but his words carried no weight. Deals fell through, trust evaporated, and the shine he loved to flaunt dulled into panic. As for Madison, her fall was swift and brutal. One moment, she was the new face of leadership. The next, she was a cautionary tale whispered in the lobby. I heard she tried to land another executive role, but doors closed before they even opened. The industry has a long memory for failure dressed up as confidence. And me, I didn't march back in to reclaim the chair they stole. I didn't need to. Power doesn't always mean sitting at the head of the table. Sometimes it means knowing you could, but choosing not to. Instead, I stepped into a new role on my own terms, working directly with the clients who had seen through the smoke and mirrors. My name wasn't erased anymore. It was requested. Looking back, I realized something simple but sharp. Not every throne is worth sitting on. Some are just props built on shaky ground, ready to collapse the moment someone careless takes a seat. Madison thought she had seized power. What she didn't see was that the throne she claimed was already wired to self-destruct. That's the lesson I carry with me now. Don't waste your life proving yourself to people who only value appearances. Build something solid, something that doesn't vanish with a title change or a trending hashtag. Quiet strength outlives loud illusions. So let me ask you this. Have you ever watched someone grab for power only to realize too late it was a trap? Or maybe you've been in that position yourself. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Sometimes sharing your story helps someone else feel less alone.